Hello and welcome to MEE Live. I'm Matilda Mallinson. It's Tuesday, the 24th of February, 2026. Today, Reform UK unveiled. ICE, Prevent and the UAE. If Reform came into power in the UK, they would create an ICE-style agency dedicated to deporting hundreds of thousands of people, their Home Affairs spokesperson announced on Monday.
A Reform government will launch an emergency programme. We will create a new agency, UK Deportation Command, which will have just one mission: to track down and detain those in this country illegally. We will rapidly build detention capacity. We will embark on the most audacious charter flight operation since World War II. And to guarantee success, His Majesty's Royal Air Force will keep a Voyager aircraft on standby as a hot spare. So even if a plane has mechanical issues, flights will not be stopped.
Speaking at a Reform-branded podium that erroneously labelled him Shadow Home Secretary, Zia Yusuf laid out Reform's proposal. Dubbed Operation Restoring Justice, the plan would create a UK deportation command tasked with meeting deportation quotas of hundreds of thousands of people a year. Zia Yusuf was Reform's largest donor in the run-up to the 2024 general election before becoming party chairman and later spokesperson for Home Affairs. The Shadow Home Secretary in the UK is a position reserved for the official opposition party. That's the one with the largest number of seats in Parliament besides the government. At the moment, the Conservatives. Reform UK is the sixth largest party in Parliament with 8 seats to the Conservatives' 116. Now, the UK already has a deportation force, but Reform's ramped-up model has been likened to Donald Trump's rapid recruitment and aggressive deployment of immigration and customs enforcement agents across the USA. The US president's rollout of mass deportation has seen plane loads of unnamed individuals disappeared into an El Salvadorian mega jail. It's seen children unlawfully detained, dozens of people, including US citizens and bystanders, shot and killed by immigration officers, and widespread protests and political unrest across the US. An ICE-style agency was just one policy in a package of expansive anti-migrant, anti-Muslim and anti-diversity proposals outlined by the would-be Home Secretary, as well as an increase in state surveillance and policing powers. Zia Yusuf said a Reform government would repeal human rights law, rapidly expand detention facilities, revoke visa rights from several Asian and African countries as per Trump's so-called Muslim travel ban, revoke indefinite leave to remain from potentially millions of UK residents, overhaul the UK's counter-extremism programme to specifically target Islamist extremism, scrap diversity initiatives in police recruitment, expand police stop and search powers, and protect the Christian heritage of Britain. We'll get into the implications, efficacy and legality of these policies shortly. First up, MEE's political correspondent Imran Mullah is here to take us through the key takeaways of yesterday's speech, including one you'll only have spotted by reading between the lines. Imran Mullah, welcome back to MEE Live. Now, the Reform Party has branded itself as unapologetically anti-immigration from the start. We're now starting to learn about how they'd actually execute this. Tell us, what details did we learn yesterday about their mass deportation policy, and what kind of reaction has it had so far?
Well, it's quite amusing that Zia Yusuf has called himself the Shadow Home Secretary, which he's not, but it does signal how confident Reform is that it's going to enter government. So they've previously said they want to deport a staggering 600,000 people, illegal migrants, in 5 years. Now, that would mean deporting 300 people a day, potentially. So how would they do that? Now Zia Yusuf's come up with the answer, and it's going to be an ICE-style agency, so modelled off of what they have in the US, and it will be tasked with hunting, detaining and deporting illegal migrants wherever they can find them. But that brings with it another issue, which is detention. they're going to have to build these huge detention centres, and Zia Yusuf has promised that reform will rapidly build detention facilities to hold 27,000 people. So these are not particularly popular policies among the British public at large, but they do play well with reform's base.
And it's not just cracking down on foreign nationals that reform says they're going to do. They also have talked about cracking down on extremism at home. But they characterise extremism in the UK as almost exclusively an Islamic extremism problem. This is interesting when you look at data from the government's counter-terrorism scheme Prevent, because the latest data set shows that we get more referrals for extreme far-right threats than we do Islamist threats in this country. So tell us, where is reform basing their fears or their concerns around Islamic extremism being the primary threat of extremism in this country?
Well, I think reform is responding to grievances that are common among the British public about perceived high rates of immigration, perceived lack of Muslim integration, and the terrorist threat from Muslims in Britain. But it's also the case that reform is clearly stoking fears about Muslims in Britain. I think this is well evidenced. Nigel Farage just 2 weeks ago declared that an intelligence source had told him that Islamists have infiltrated British politics, the British education system, and even the police. Now, presumably they haven't infiltrated the intelligence services, otherwise they wouldn't have told Farage that. But this was an extraordinary proclamation because it's completely unevidenced. The idea that Islamists have infiltrated British politics, and note that Islamists aren't clearly defined, so what sort of Muslims exactly is he talking about? Another example is Zia Yusuf. I was at the Reform Party conference several months ago reporting on it, and heard Zia Yusuf say that the British government is planning to criminalise criticism of Islam. Now, that's not true at all. Labour is working on an anti-Muslim hostility definition, but that's not going to be legally binding at all, and it's not going to ban criticism of Islam. So he's repeating falsehoods. And Zia Yusuf declares himself a British Muslim patriot. He said that Muslims themselves are worried that Labour's policies like this are going to stir resentment against Muslims. Well, many people would argue that it's Zia Yusuf's false statements and fear-mongering that are stoking resentment against Muslims.
You know, we should actually watch the part of that speech where Zia Yusuf outlined some of these ideas, because there's another aspect to his description of the Islamic extremist threat in the UK that you have pointed out as quite interesting. Let's just take a look at that moment.
As Home Secretary, I will confront the real and growing threat of Islamist extremism that has been allowed to take root here in Britain. It's been tolerated for too long. Tolerated out of fear of being called names. It's a national scandal that Jewish people are being harassed on our streets and even on our public transport. As Home Secretary, I will not mince words, and I will not flinch in the face of progressive outrage. Well, as Home Secretary, I will immediately prescribe the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps as a terrorist organisation, along with any other organisation that promotes extremism in Britain.
Reform will immediately prescribe two groups as terrorist organisations, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, a range of British polls show quite popular support for prescribing the IRGC as a terrorist organisation. The Muslim Brotherhood is another story. Many Brits don't even know what that group is. So tell us, what is the Muslim Brotherhood, and why is Reform so fixated on them?
Well, it's a good point, because your average Reform supporter is not losing sleep over the Muslim Brotherhood and, worried about, the brothers are coming. And it's not something that people really know about in this country. So where is it coming from? Well, it's the United Arab Emirates, which ironically is an Arab dictatorship in the Middle East, which has no free speech and in which most of the population are immigrants. So the UAE and Reform are in a kind of passionate love affair, and I reported a few weeks ago on a private party on a rooftop hotel in Dubai, which Nigel Farage was present. It was a GB News party, and a UAE minister was present, the Minister for Industry. And Farage, in his speech, he said, "We have much to learn from you, my good sirs," talking to the Emirati officials. He said he wanted to turn Clacton, his constituency in England, into the Palm, which is the famous island in Dubai. And he also praised the UAE for banning the Muslim Brotherhood and said that reform would do the same. So this is why the UAE is interested in reform, is because of an apparent shared opposition to political Islam. The UAE doesn't like having Muslims in countries that aren't dictatorships who can criticize authoritarianism and criticize their agenda. And so they've, for many years, funded campaigns against Muslim organizations in Europe. One example is Emirati-linked banks financing the national Marine Le Pen's party in France. Another example is a UAE campaign against Islamic Relief, which is the largest Muslim charity in Britain. So it's really going after all sorts of Muslim organizations. And I would highlight that the Muslim Brotherhood is not an organization which has been proven to have any significant influence or impact or even presence in the UK at all, either as a unitary organization or even as a network. So what is the Brotherhood threat? And I think that its very elusive nature makes it so useful as a phantom menace, because it allows various actors to actually go after different Muslim organizations that they want to. Now, note that Zia Yusuf said in his speech that we'll also ban organizations promoting extremism. The definition of extremism in Britain is opposition to British values. The former Conservative government came close to designating the Muslim Council of Britain and Friends of Al-Aqsa as extremists. So it's quite plausible that reform would do the same with these Muslim organizations and would then ban them, which is actually, this is not what a liberal democracy does. It's what a dictatorship does, banning organizations that aren't violent and are not seditious just because you don't like them.
Imran Mullah, thank you so much for your time today. Now, by far the most controversial part of Zia Yusuf's incendiary speech was his proposal to bring an ICE-style mass deportation agency to the UK. Incidentally, this is not exclusively a reform policy. Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch has also promised a British equivalent of ICE and echoes reform's pledges to leave the European Convention of Human Rights as well. The UK's right wing appears to be casting an eye to America, where President Donald Trump returned to the White House on an electoral pledge of mass deportations. This involved the rapid expansion of the US Immigration Customs Enforcement Agency, or ICE, both in size and in powers. In a year, ICE arrests led to 230,000 deportations, more than the 4-year total of Biden's preceding term. What that has looked like in reality is blind raids by masked armed agents tasked with meeting ballooning arrest quotas. Individuals have been black-bagged into unmarked vans, often on the basis of their skin colour, name or accent, leading to fierce community protests against a fear-inducing federal encroachment. Clashes between ICE agents and local protesters have led to multiple acts of fatal violence by law enforcement. The fatalities do not only include Renee Good and Alex Pretty, 2 white US citizens whose death triggered a governmental crisis, but actually a record-breaking number of people who have died in immigration detention. 32 lives lost in 2025. They died of seizure and heart failure, stroke, respiratory failure, tuberculosis, suicide. On New Year's Eve, an off-duty ICE agent shot and killed Keith Porter, a 43-year-old father of 2 from Los Angeles. On January 3rd, a Cuban man called Geraldo Lunos Campos died in an ICE facility as well. Contradicting details have emerged about his death from ICE. They said he became disruptive and was segregated before later changing their story to say that Campos had tried to kill himself. But an autopsy report found that he was killed by someone, with the cause of death being asphyxia due to a neck and torso compression. According to an eyewitness inside the facility, Campos was choked to death by guards at the facility. Nearly two-thirds of Americans say ICE has gone too far. A majority say it makes Americans less safe. So why does reform want to bring it to the UK? And will it work? Like Reform's Zia Yusuf, our next guest has been a self-proclaimed shadow Home Secretary as of yesterday, and she has plenty to say about her contenders' immigration policies. Zoe Gardiner is an independent researcher specialising in UK immigration and asylum policy. She joins us now. Zoe, welcome to MEE Live. ICE in the UK, is reform onto an electoral winner with this one?
Hi there, and thank you so much for having me. Actually, I think, interestingly, maybe not. So, obviously, Zia Yusuf and the Reform Party in general absolutely claim to be reflecting public dissatisfaction with immigration policy, and that certainly exists. There is really widespread dissatisfaction with how immigration is being managed in this country. But they seem to be moving, and I think this is the strongest indication we've had yet with Yusuf's speech, of their shift away from what mainstream British public opinion supports and towards a very Americanized influence on their policy proposals. So, yeah, as you mentioned, they want to develop this UK Deportation Command that it would be modelled on the ICE agency. ICE has about 11% of the country here in the UK having a positive view of it. So we're talking about a vastly unpopular approach, actually, that they are seeking to openly emulate. And I think we've also had lots of indications that reform is actually moving away from public opinion more broadly. Public opinion seems to be, generally speaking, warming up very slightly towards immigration, or at least maybe not warming up towards immigration, but immigration is reducing in salience again, having reached a really high peak over the last year. And the cost of living is once again the most important issue that voters are reporting. So I think that what we're seeing here is that while reform is being squeezed from the right with the emergence of the Restore Party, and it was really interesting also to hear about the funding that they're receiving from the UAE, they're also probably looking to receive funding from the announcement that the MAGA-aligned movement is going to be funding nationalist research and nationalist movements across Europe. So they're trying to align themselves with that kind of funding, that kind of money, and to compete with the Restore Party, which is also being funded from the US by Elon Musk. And in doing so, they seem to be actually moving away from mainstream British opinion on immigration.
Thank you. So if this isn't about British public opinion, perhaps it is about money. Let's look at what it is ICE Reform are talking about. They say that they will launch an ICE-style deportation force in the UK. What many people probably don't realise is the UK already has a body like that. The UK's Deportation Task Force showcases its immigration crackdown on social media, much like ICE. It's deported 50,000 people so far under Labour's 2025 Borders, Security, Asylum and Immigration Act. Reform also says it'll rapidly build immigration detention centres to hold over 24,000 people. But again, the UK already uses immigration detention centres. In fact, it's unique in Western Europe for having no statutory time limit, meaning it can, and it does, detain immigrants without trial for years and years. If we're already using these methods and Reform are planning on spending a lot of money expanding them, why aren't they already working?
The big question that I wish more journalists would ask. So thank you very much for that question. This approach doesn't work. It is extremely expensive. But the problem is that our immigration system produces people systematically who are unable to maintain a legal status in the UK. And therefore, no matter how many people that you invest in locking up and sending away, you will always be producing more people to take their place because the system itself is broken and the system itself is designed in such a way that people are unable to retain a safe and stable status in the country. And actually, what you've mentioned is really important. The UK government at the moment is finding itself in a really awkward position. They're both trying to criticized the reform announcements of more detention and more deportations, while also trying to tout their own achievements of more detention and more deportation. For some reason, they claim that the reform version would be un-British, but their version is the Britishest thing since Britishness. And that's really awkward, because what we're seeing is that this massive investment in what is a totally privatized system of detention and deportation that this government has pursued is not yielding the results, either in terms of reducing the need for people to come to safety in the UK, or in terms of public opinion and public understanding that this is a successful approach to immigration. So we just signed another 6-year contract with the private contractor MEE to reopen a new detention centre and expand our privatised detention estate. That is going to cost us hundreds of millions of pounds. It's far more expensive to detain people than it is to just accommodate them and support them to be part of our communities. And that is building up an infrastructure that a future reform government could rely on. So we are in a difficult situation where the cost of this this approach is always justified. And in fact, we talk so much more about how we apparently can't afford immigration. What we can't actually afford is the continued escalation of the growth of this privatized industry of deportation and detention, which is what we've seen happening as well in the United States, and a ballooning, insane increase in spending on detention and deportation, all of it going into the hands of private companies as well.
If reforms policies won't work, what will? I mean, you're the first to admit that people have valid concerns about uncontrolled immigration or a broken immigration and asylum system. I realise this is a big question, but just point us in the right direction. If it's not mass deportation, it's not mass detention, what is it?
Yeah, well, I think that what we need to recognise are two fundamental truths that not Keir Starmer and not Nigel Farage and not Rupert Lowe and not even Donald Trump can get rid of these truths, which are: one is that people do need to escape from persecution or from a lack of opportunity around the world and need to come to the UK to find safety and opportunity. There are people who need to do that, and they will continue to do that. And also the other side of that, which is that the UK needs people. People need one another. We need people. We need people to work. We need people to support the fact that we have an aging population. That is a demographic reality that simply isn't going away. So we have a country that needs people and people that need to come to a country. And we have an insane industry of spending billions of pounds trying to keep people out. We also have an industry of recruitment, going out and aggressively recruiting around the world for people to come in order to work in the jobs where we so desperately need them. So we have an insane system, basically. What we need to do is match up the fact that people need to come here with the fact that we need people. We need to invest in people. And there's research that came out just at the end of last year by the London School of Economics that models different sort of economic scenarios of how we could approach the asylum system, and finds, surprise, surprise, that if we invest early in day one support for integration and legal representation for asylum seekers, not only do we wipe out the cost of the asylum system, we would actually get a net economic benefit from people coming to the UK. And that's what they're seeing in countries like Spain, that has taken a completely different approach to immigration and to the integration of asylum seekers. They are across Europe, asylum seekers have the right to work, whereas here in the UK they don't. But in Spain, they specifically have programs to match people in the asylum system with industries where they have shortages of workers. And those local companies will then train asylum seekers in order to be able to fulfill gaps in their economy. So the Spanish economy is now growing significantly faster than ours, but also any other country in Europe. And this is being attributed to their efforts to integrate migrants into their labour system. That's the actual answer. And obviously, it also has the moral benefit of treating people who need to come here with the opportunity and the respect that they deserve.
Okay, Zoe, and now just before we end, I'm going to break from the unusually calm way in which you're talking about immigration and just return to Zia Yusuf's speech. If viewers were to take one thing away from Reform's speech on Monday, it would probably be something like this.
Almost 200,000 people have broken into our country across the English Channel over the last 8 years. More than stormed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. Knife crime stalks entire neighbourhoods. English girls were raped on an industrial scale while those in authority looked the other way. It's a betrayal on a scale that's frankly hard to comprehend. Make no mistake, I will end and indeed reverse this invasion. Invasion. The invasion.
An invasion.
Yes, this is a national emergency. A reform government will launch an emergency programme. We will use emergency powers. Our plan is the only appropriate response to a national security emergency.
Zoe Gardner, is immigration a national security emergency?
No. Our welfare state and our well-being and our moral compass all depend on receiving immigrants and treating them fairly and justly. What that emergency legislation that Zia Yusuf is talking about would do would not only suspend our membership of the European Convention on Human Rights, but also would suspend the UN Convention Against Torture, the UN Convention for the Elimination of Trafficking, and the UN Refugee Convention. And probably also, though they don't mention it, they would have to remove the rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child as well. They would have to abandon the principle that we do not send people, including trafficked women or children, to face situations of danger and torture. And we would have to cut deals with countries like Iran and Sudan and Eritrea, which are some of the worst human rights abusing countries in the entire world, in order to get them to receive people back into their torture cells. So the emergency is the risk that we elect a government led by Reform and that they would enact anything so heinous.
Zoe Gardner, thank you so much for your time here on MEE Live. Now for today, that is all that we have time for. But before we lose you, we would love to hear from you. Please send in your thoughts and questions to @MiddleEastEye on any social platform or email meelive@middleeasteye.net. We'll be here at 5 p.m. GMT, noon in New York, every Tuesday and Thursday. See you then.